I would always joke with my friends that I was the unlucky one, the guy who never seemed to catch a break with dating or family drama. But that all changed when I became friends with Jake. We were inseparable brothers in all but blood. I never imagined his sister Lindsay would destroy everything with a single lie. My traditional parents chose to believe her story that I had gotten her pregnant. They disowned me on the spot. Now the truth is finally out, and they are begging me to come home. If you are watching this, drop a comment about a time someone betrayed your trust, hit subscribe, and let me know where you are watching from. The first time I met Jake was during freshman orientation at Boston University. We were both studying engineering, both from traditional families, and both passionate about the same obscure indie bands nobody else seemed to know about. It was one of those instant connections that just made sense. For 3 years, we were inseparable, spending holidays at each other, houses, studying together for brutal exams, and helping each other through the typical college struggles. I grew up in a traditional household where values and reputation meant everything. My father worked as a bank manager, my mother taught elementary school, and both were deeply involved in our local church community. They raised me with strict moral standards, emphasizing the importance of honesty, responsibility, and making the family proud. While I sometimes chafed under their expectations, I respected them and wanted to live up to the values they instilled in me. Jake often talked about his younger sister Lindsay, who would be joining us at Boston University the following year. When she finally arrived on campus as a freshman, while we were starting our senior year, I was surprised by how different she was from her brother. Where Jake was laid back, and genuine Lindsay seemed to constantly perform for attention. She was undeniably beautiful, with long auburn hair and a confidence that drew people to her, but something about her made me uncomfortable. Whenever we were all hanging out together, I noticed how she would find excuses to touch my arm or sit unnecessarily close to me. I tried to be polite, but maintained clear boundaries, especially since Jake was my best friend. I never mentioned these interactions to Jake, not wanting to create awkwardness between us or make assumptions about his sister's intentions. Everything changed after Jake's 22nd birthday party at his off-campus apartment. The celebration started innocently enough, with about 15 friends, good music, and plenty of food. I had a couple beers early in the night, but switched to water after that, knowing I had an important project meeting the next morning. Throughout the evening, Lindsay kept appearing at my side with drink offers, which I politely declined. As the night wore on and people started heading home, Jake insisted I stay over rather than drive back to my place. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and I gratefully accepted the offer of the small guest room. I remember clearly locking the door before collapsing into bed, exhausted from the long day and the festivities. When I woke up the next morning, something felt off. The room looked slightly different than I remembered from the night before. A chair had been moved, and my phone, which I distinctly recalled placing on the nightstand, was now on the dresser across the room. I brushed off the strange feeling, assuming I was just disoriented from sleeping in an unfamiliar place. Jake and I had breakfast together, and when I asked about Lindsay, he mentioned she had already left for an early morning class. Nothing seemed unusual, and I headed to campus for my meeting completely unaware that my life was about to implode. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 days after the party. Lindsay started texting me frequently, messages filled with winking emojis and references to our amazing time together. One message particularly confused me. "Thanks for making my birthday so special for both of us." I will never forget it. I was completely baffled. We had barely interacted at the party beyond her offering me drinks. I responded with non-committal replies, trying to be polite without encouraging whatever game she was playing. When she texted, "I miss feeling your arms around me," I finally replied clearly, "Lindsay, I think there has been a misunderstanding. Nothing happened between us at the party." Her response was instantaneous and chilling. "Wow, so that's how you are going to play this? I thought you were different." I showed the messages to my roommate Tyler, who suggested Lindsay might have a crush and was trying to create a narrative that did not exist. I decided the best approach was to maintain distance from her while being respectful, not wanting to create problems with Jake. Speaking of Jake, he began acting strangely around me. In our shared classes, he would arrive just as lectures started and leave immediately after avoiding our usual conversations. When I texted him about grabbing lunch, his responses were short and evasive. I assumed he was just busy with senior year stress until I overheard two classmates whispering about me in the library. Jake's sister is saying they hooked up at his birthday party, one said to the other. Jake is furious, apparently. She is really upset about how Jason is treating her afterward. My blood ran cold. I immediately tried calling Jake, but he did not pick up. I sent him a message explaining that whatever Lindsay was saying was completely false, but all I got back was, "I need some space right now, man. We will talk later." By the end of the week, the whispers had spread across our friend group. People I had known for years were suddenly giving me cold looks or avoiding me entirely. But nothing prepared me for the call that came from my mother on Friday afternoon. "Jason," her voice trembled in a way I had never heard before, "you need to come home right now, not next weekend. Today. No explanation, no room for negotiation." The drive to my parents' house, 2 hours outside Boston, was the longest of my life. My mind raced through possibilities of what could have happened. Had someone gotten sick? Was there a family emergency? Never did I imagine what was actually waiting for me. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home just as the sun was setting. Through the living room window, I could see both my parents sitting stiffly on the sofa, their postures radiating tension. My father, normally quick to greet me at the door, remained seated as I entered, his face a mask of barely controlled anger. My mother would not meet my eyes. "What is going on?" I asked, setting my backpack down in the entryway. "Sit down," my father commanded, pointing to the chair across from them. His voice, usually warm, even when disappointed, was ice cold. As I sank into the chair, my mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How could you do this, Jason? We raised you better than this." Do what I was genuinely confused, looking back and forth between their grim expressions. My father slammed his hand on the coffee table, making both my mother and me jump. "Do not play dumb with us." Lindsay's parents called us this morning. She told them everything. My heart plummeted as realization dawned. Whatever lie Lindsay had been spreading had now reached my parents. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but my father cut me off. "She is pregnant, Jason. Pregnant. She says you took advantage of her when she was drunk at that party. Her parents are livid, and frankly, so are we." The accusation was so absurd, so completely disconnected from reality, that for a moment I could not even formulate a response. When I finally found my voice, it came out strangled with disbelief. "That is absolutely not true. Nothing happened between Lindsay and me." "Nothing." My mother began to cry softly. "Why would she lie about something like this?" she asked through her tears. "I do not know why she would lie, but I swear to you, I never touched her. I was in the guest room. I locked the door. I went straight to sleep." I explained about the strange texts, about Jake's sudden coldness, about the rumors. I told them everything, desperately hoping they would believe their own son. But with each word, I could see their expressions harden. They had already made up their minds. "In this family," my father said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage, "we take responsibility for our actions. If you cannot do that, if you cannot be honest with us and face the consequences of what you have done, then you are no longer welcome in this house. Dad, please." I begged, feeling the ground crumbling beneath me. "I am telling you the truth. I need you to believe me. Either you marry this girl and provide for your child," my father continued as if I had not spoken, "or you are no longer my son." My mother sobbed harder, now clutching a tissue to her face. "We did not raise you to abandon a young woman in this situation," she said between gasps. "How could you dishonor our family this way?" No matter what I said, how much I protested or explained, they would not budge. The conversation circled endlessly, with my parents demanding I take responsibility for something I had not done, and me desperately trying to convince them of the truth. After 2 hours of this, my father finally stood up. "Since you refuse to do the right thing, you have made your choice. I want you out of this house. Now, Dad, it is almost midnight," I protested, looking out at the rain that had started falling. "You should have thought of that before," he replied coldly. "Take what you need for tonight and go. When you are ready to accept your responsibilities, you can come back." My mother said nothing, just cried silently as I numbly packed a small bag with toiletries and a change of clothes. Neither of my parents looked at me as I walked out the door into the pouring rain, my entire world collapsing around me. The first week after being disowned was a blur of panic and survival. I slept in my car for 3 nights, parked in the back lot of a 24-hour grocery store, using the store bathroom to clean up before classes. I could not afford a hotel on my meager part-time job salary, especially since I was saving every penny for rent deposits. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face twisted with disappointment and my mother's tears. On the 4th day, I found a tiny basement studio apartment that I could just barely afford. The landlord wanted first and last month rent plus security deposit, which nearly wiped out my savings, but I was desperate. The place was damp with concrete walls and a window that looked out at ground level, but it was shelter. I moved in with just my backpack car trunk of belongings and a borrowed air mattress from Tyler, the only friend who still believed me. I tried calling home repeatedly, hoping my parents would calm down and listen to reason, but my calls went straight to voicemail. After a week, I discovered they had blocked my number. Emails bounced back undelivered. It was as if I had been completely erased from their lives. Meanwhile, the situation at school deteriorated rapidly. Jake fully avoided me, now having apparently chosen to believe his sister over our 3 years of friendship. Rumors spread like wildfire, with embellishments that painted me as increasingly predatory. A girl in my calculus class who used to study with me now changed seats to be far away. My lab partners requested reassignment. The final blow came when I was called into the Dean of Students' office. A formal complaint had been filed against me for sexual misconduct. While Lindsay had not taken it to the university officially, the rumors had reached faculty ears and they were obligated to investigate. I sat in a sterile office, trying to defend myself against accusations with no evidence on either side. It was her word against mine, and, in the current climate, her word carried more weight. I was not suspended, but was placed on probation pending investigation. My scholarship was under review. The research position I had been promised for the summer was suddenly uncertain. In the span of 2 weeks, I had lost my family, my best friend, my reputation, and potentially my academic future. The lowest point came when I was let go from my campus job at the engineering lab. The professor I worked for called me in and awkwardly explained that with the allegations circulating, it would be better if I did not continue in a position that involved mentoring younger students. I nodded numbly, understanding the impossible position he was in, but feeling another support beam of my life crumble. Alone in my basement apartment that night, I hit rock bottom. I sat on my air mattress, surrounded by my few possessions, and felt utterly abandoned. For the first time since everything began, I allowed myself to break down completely sobbing until I had no tears left. When the storm of emotion passed, I was left with a strange clarity. If no one would fight for me, I would have to fight for myself. If no one would believe me, I would have to find proof. The next morning, I started making a list of everyone who had been at the party. I needed to find someone, anyone, who might have seen something that could help clear my name. Most people on the list were already avoiding me, but one name stood out: Sarah Lindsay, roommate and best friend. While not exactly friendly with me, Sarah had always seemed more level-headed, than the drama-focused crowd Lindsay typically surrounded herself with. It took 5 attempts before Sarah agreed to meet me, and even then she insisted on a public place, a coffee shop on the opposite side of campus from where Lindsay might be. She sat across from me, arms crossed defensively, clearly uncomfortable. "I appreciate you meeting with me," I said quietly. "I just want to understand what is happening." Sarah looked around nervously before leaning forward slightly. "Look, I am only here because something about this whole situation feels off to me. I have known Lindsay for years, and this is not the first time she has exaggerated things." My heart jumped. "What do you mean?" She twirled her coffee cup anxiously. "Lindsay likes attention. She likes drama. Last year she told everyone her English professor was sexually harassing her. It caused a huge investigation, but in the end, it turned out he had just given her a bad grade on a paper and suggested she visit the writing center." Hope flickered inside me for the first time in weeks. "Do you think she is lying about me?" Sarah looked pained. "I do not know for sure, but—" Sarah hesitated, then continued more quietly. "That night at the party, I saw her going into Tom's room really late. Not yours. Tom, one of Jake's fraternity brothers." I stared at her. "Tom. But she is saying I am the one who—" She shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I cannot get involved officially. Lindsay is still my roommate and my friend. But I thought you should know that some of us have questions about her story." And she paused, lowering her voice even further. "She has been acting weird about the supposed pregnancy, refusing to see a doctor, making excuses. It does not add up." With this new information, I felt a renewed determination. I thanked Sarah profusely for her honesty, promising to keep our conversation private. As I left the coffee shop, my mind was already formulating a plan. I needed evidence beyond just Sarah's suspicions. I needed something concrete. I remembered that Jake's neighbor across the street, an elderly man named Mr. Rodriguez, had installed security cameras after a series of car break-ins the previous year. Those cameras pointed directly at the front of Jake's apartment building and would have captured anyone coming or going the night of the party. It took several days of waiting outside his house before I finally caught Mr. Place, Rodriguez, outside, watering his plants. Approaching him was a risk. He might have already heard the rumors, but I was desperate. To my relief, he remembered me as Jake's friend and listened sympathetically to my heavily edited version of events. I simply told him I needed to verify the timing of when certain people left the party for a misunderstanding that had gotten out of hand. At first reluctant, he eventually agreed to show me the footage after I explained how important it was for clearing up a serious situation. We sat in his cluttered living room as he pulled up the recordings on his computer. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to identify people. I watched as party guests arrived and later departed throughout the evening. Then, at 1:47 a.m., I saw myself clearly entering the building, presumably when Jake and I returned from walking someone to their car. At 2:03 a.m., the cameras showed Lindsay coming out the front door with Tom, his arm around her waist. They walked to his car, parked down the street, and drove away. The timestamp showed they did not return until 4:38 a.m. This was concrete proof that Lindsay had not been in the building during the time she claimed I had taken advantage of her. She had been with Tom, but I needed more to fully clear my name. I thanked Mr. Rodriguez profusely and asked for a copy of the relevant footage, which he provided on a USB drive. My next step was finding Tom, which proved challenging since he was part of Jake's inner circle who were all avoiding me. I finally cornered him coming out of the engineering building late one evening. "We need to talk," I said, blocking his path. "I have nothing to say to you, man," he replied, trying to step around me. "I know you were with Lindsay the night of Jake's birthday party," I said quietly. "I have video evidence of you two leaving together at 2 a.m. and not coming back until almost 5. The color drained from his face. "That is not." We just went for a drive. Cut the crap, Tom. Lindsay is telling everyone. I got her pregnant, but she was with you that night. My entire life is falling apart because of her lie. Tom glanced around nervously, then pulled me toward a quiet corner of the building. Look, I did not know she was saying it was you. Okay, Jake would kill me if he knew I hooked up with his sister. It was supposed to be our secret. So you admit you were with her? Yeah, but it was consensual. She was totally into it. And she was not drunk, I swear. We have been hooking up for months, but keeping it quiet because of Jake. The pieces were finally falling into place. Did you use protection? I asked awkwardly. Tom looked confused. Of course, always. Why? Because she is claiming to be pregnant. His eyes widened. That is impossible. Well, nearly impossible. We were always careful. Armed with this new information, I consulted with a free legal aid attorney available through the university. She advised me that if Lindsay was making a false pregnancy claim, the simplest resolution would be a paternity test. However, without any official charges, I could not legally compel Lindsay to take one. My attorney suggested an alternative approach involving the university hearing process. At my request, the university scheduled a formal hearing about the allegations. Lindsay initially tried to decline participation, but the administration made it clear that her accusations, which were affecting my academic standing, required her cooperation in the process. The hearing was set for the following week. During that time, I gathered all my evidence, the security footage, text messages, and written statements from both Sarah and Tom, who had finally agreed to come forward rather than be implicated in a pregnancy scandal. The day before the hearing, Lindsay suddenly withdrew her complaint from the university process, claiming she wanted to handle the matter privately. But it was too late. The wheels were in motion, and the dean of students, now suspicious of the shifting story, insisted the process continue to clear my record. In a surprising turn of events, Lindsay stopped appearing on campus altogether. Through the grapevine, I heard she had suddenly announced she had miscarried. When the university requested medical documentation as part of the ongoing investigation, she could not provide any evidence she had ever been pregnant in the first place. Everything unraveled quickly after that. The university investigation concluded that there was no evidence to support the allegations against me. My probation was lifted, my scholarship reinstated. But the damage to my reputation, my friendship with Jake, and my relationship with my family remained. The final confrontation happened on a Sunday afternoon. I had requested a meeting with Jake Lindsay and her parents at the University Mediation Center. To my surprise, they all agreed to attend. Lindsay presumably thought she could continue to deny everything, not knowing how much evidence I had gathered. I arrived early, setting up the room with my attorney present and a university counselor as mediator. When the others arrived, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jake looked confused and angry. Lindsay's parents appeared defensive and hostile. Lindsay herself looked nervous but defiant. I have asked you all here because it is time for the truth to come out. I began my voice steadier than I expected. For the past 2 months, my life has been destroyed by a lie. I have lost my family, my reputation, and nearly my education. Lindsay immediately started to protest, but the mediator gently reminded her that each person would have uninterrupted time to speak. I proceeded to methodically present my evidence, the security footage showing Lindsay leaving with Tom written statement, confirming their relationship, Sarah testimony about Lindsay's history of fabrications, and the lack of any medical evidence of a pregnancy. As I spoke, I could see Jake's expression shifting from anger to confusion to dawning horror. Lindsay's parents exchanged increasingly troubled glances, and Lindsay herself seemed to physically shrink in her chair, her confidence crumbling with each piece of evidence presented. When I finished, the room was silent for several long moments. Finally, the mediator asked if Lindsay would like to respond. She looked around the room, her eyes filling with tears. Then, in a small voice, so unlike her usual confident tone, she said, "I made it up." Her parents gasped. Jake put his head in his hands. "Why?" The word burst from Jake like a gunshot. "Why would you do something like this?" Lindsay was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I liked Jason, but he never noticed me. He always turned me down, made me feel invisible. I was drunk after the party, and Tom was there, and, afterward, I felt so ashamed. When people started asking questions, I panicked. I said it was Jason because I was angry he never wanted me. As her confession tumbled out, I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, relief, but also an exhausted kind of emptiness. This admission would not instantly repair the relationships that had been broken or erase the weeks of isolation and fear I had endured. Jake looked at me, his face stricken. "Bro, I am so sorry. I should have trusted you. I should have known you would never." His voice trailed off, choked with emotion. I nodded, not quite ready to forgive, but acknowledging his apology. Lindsay's parents were in shock, her mother crying quietly, while her father looked both angry and deeply embarrassed. He turned to me and said formally, "We owe you an apology, Jason. We will be taking Lindsay home today. She will not be returning to this university." After the meeting concluded, I sat alone in the room for a long time, processing everything that had happened. The next day, the university issued a formal statement clearing my name completely. Professors who had been cold now smiled at me again. Classmates who had avoided me now attempted awkward conversations. But the most difficult confrontation still lay ahead. With the university statement in hand, I drove once more to my parents' house. This time, when I knocked on the door, my mother answered immediately, as if she had been waiting by the window. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Jason," she whispered, then threw her arms around me. I stood stiffly, not returning the embrace. My father appeared behind her, looking older than I remembered. "Is it true?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "What they are saying about the girl lying?" I handed him the university statement without a word. He read it slowly, then looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Sonai, we made a terrible mistake." They ushered me inside, both talking at once, apologizing, explaining how Lindsay's parents had convinced them, how they had been blinded by shock and disappointment, how they had regretted their actions almost immediately, but pride had kept them from reaching out. I listened silently, letting them speak until they ran out of words. Then I said simply, "You did not believe me, your own son. You threw me out without even considering I might be telling the truth." "We know," my father said, his voice breaking. "We will spend the rest of our lives trying to make it up to you. Please come home." I looked around at the house where I had grown up, the family photos on the walls, the comfortable familiarity of it all. Then I shook my head. "I cannot. Not yet." Their faces fell, but I continued, "I need time. I need space to process everything that has happened. I need to know that your trust in me is not conditional on what others say about me. But you will consider it." Coming home, eventually my mother asked hope, and fear mingled in her voice. "I will," I promised. "But it will take time to rebuild what we lost." In the months that followed, I focused on healing and rebuilding my life piece by piece. I stayed in my small apartment, finding an unexpected pride in my independence. I worked hard to catch up academically and ended up graduating with honors, despite everything that had happened. Jake and I never fully repaired our friendship. We became cordial acquaintances, able to greet each other on campus without tension, but the easy brotherhood we had shared was gone. His trust had been too easily broken, and while I did not blame him for believing his sister initially, his complete unwillingness to even consider my side of the story had revealed a fundamental weakness in our friendship. Lindsay transferred to a college in another state. I heard occasionally about her through mutual acquaintances, but made no effort to stay informed about her life. Some suggested I should sue her for defamation, but I decided that moving forward was more important than extending the drama or seeking revenge. The most complicated healing process was with my family. I began visiting them for Sunday dinners once a month. At first, these visits were strained and awkward, but gradually became more comfortable. My parents were careful not to pressure me about moving home, respecting the boundaries I had established. My father and I had a breakthrough conversation about 6 months after everything happened. We were sitting on the back porch after dinner, just the two of us, when he said quietly, "I have been thinking about why I was so quick to believe the worst about you." I turned to look at him, surprised by his candor. "I think," he continued slowly, "I was more concerned with how things looked to others than with what was true. I was worried about what people at church would say, what our friends would think. I put our reputation above your well-being, and that was wrong." His admission touched me deeply. I had always known my father to be proud, sometimes stubborn, rarely so vulnerable. I reached over and put my hand on his shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of both his pain and his growth. The most important thing I learned through all of this was the value of fighting for myself when no one else would. I discovered a strength I did not know. I possessed a resilience that carried me through the darkest moments. I learned that sometimes even the people closest to us can fail us, but that does not mean we have to fail ourselves. I still have trust issues to work through. I am cautious about new relationships, slow to open up. But I am also more compassionate toward others, facing unjust accusations or standing alone against popular opinion. I know firsthand how isolating that position can be. As for my parents, we are rebuilding our relationship on new terms, terms that include respect for my independence and a fundamental trust that cannot be shaken by outside influences. I may never move back into their home, but I am finding ways to make them part of my life again. The truth has a way of surfacing even when buried under layers of lies. In my case, it took determination evidence and a willingness to stand firm when everything seemed hopeless. If you ever find yourself in a situation where the truth is your only ally, do not give up. Keep fighting, keep believing in yourself. Has someone ever betrayed your trust in a way that changed how you view relationships? Leave a comment below and share your experience. If this story resonated with you, please hit like and subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming injustice and finding strength in difficult situations. Thank you for listening, and remember that sometimes the family we choose can be stronger than the family we are born into. Share this with someone who needs to hear that standing up for the truth is always worth it, even when you have to stand alone.